Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. The topic today will be integration modernization with ASAPIO, a topic that is currently getting more and more important. Integration as itself is a basis of most things we do between systems. And currently there is a push to modernize the integration within the SAP world. And today I want to show you how we are handling this, how ASAPIO is helping with modernizing your integration landscape, especially with event-driven architecture. So what is event-driven architecture and how does it work? First, I want to show you a couple of reasons of why I think that integration modernization is important and is becoming more and more important. So as you may know, SAP PIPO, so Process Integration and Process Orchestration, is reaching the end of its life. So support will be discontinued by the end of 2027, with a possibility to extend to 2030, although that is usually connected with extra costs. So far, most companies have not really taken that very seriously, and we're expecting a lot happening in the integration world. And as much as that is a risk, it's also an opportunity to completely revamp and modernize your integration. So how you can do that, or what you can do by doing that, is, for example, enhance your performance and scalability. Um, a lot of companies that we've worked with had their integration strategies or their integration set up for decades. So scalability is something that's always a question. Is it possible? How can it be done easily and quickly? And now is an opportunity to switch to actually something more modern, something more scalable. At the same time, also security is a question. Reliability and security, modernizing the integration, implementing the newest security protocols can help with making sure that you're compliant with all the industry standards. Another big aspect is, of course, cost efficiency. As I said, many integration architectures that we've seen have been set up for decades and are being done because it has always been done that way. What we can do here is, of course, with a new approach, rethink the whole concept, rethink the whole architecture, and make it more cost efficient without staying in that old world. And of course, big topic nowadays, Internet of Things, AI. Um, with the classical integration strategies, usually that is not really working the way that new and modern technologies approach this. So with these, you're already paving the way to a more modern integration, to a more modern data analysis, to using AI and staying competitive. So as I said, this is not just a webinar on what we're doing, it's also a call to action, because this is a topic that has in the recent years not been taken seriously enough, considering that PIPO is running out of support in 2027. So it's definitely something that I think is important to do and is important to approach as quickly as possible before we reach the deadline and then have to hurry up and miss all the opportunities that we have here because it needs to be done quickly. So how does the immigration assessment process usually work? So the way we approach this is to say, okay, we do an immigration assessment. There's multiple tools that SAP offers for this immigration assessment. There's apps that you can use. And usually the way it goes is that all the interfaces are analyzed and split into three categories. The categories here, I've given them names based on complexity and doability, let's call it. So the first one is the SAP Cloud Integration one. That's the standard way. That's the ready to migrate scenarios with SAP BTP migration tooling. So very easy, very quickly, you can migrate those to an CI system on the BTP. Then there's the category that I called API management, means there is existing OData services. We can auto-generate APIs from them. We're building a wrapper around them, around existing scenarios. and can implement those easily. And then there's the complex scenarios. Complex scenarios in this case means limited support on CI, nothing really replacing them currently in the new world. Um, Scenarios that might not necessarily be the most complex one, as the name say. They might be quite simple, but it's just the way they're built is not something that's not necessarily supported by SAP Cloud Integration. So we need to look into each scenario individually and figure out what to do with them. So once we have those three categories, what we do is really, as I just mentioned, go through these interfaces, ask ourselves the questions of what needs to be done, how can this be integrated most efficiently, and then guide you on creating a future integration strategy for all your scenarios. And this all sounds very simple. It's very easy. We have the three categories. You would think, okay, for each category, there's a strategy that we can go. So an arrow down from each category, simple, done in no matter of time. If there wasn't the complex scenarios. So the complex scenarios, from our experience, are usually the biggest bunch of scenarios in this assessment. So from around 60% is usually the guess, would be the complex scenarios. So it's not always that easy. There is no straight down arrow from the complex scenarios. Each scenario can look very differently, and a lot of them can be repeating. It's always something that needs to be assessed in more detail. And one way that we have noticed to deal with those complex scenarios is actually quite simple in some way, and that's event-driven art integration. So event-driven integration, I've written down here the definition of it. So it's the architectural style where one system publishes a data event indicating a state change, and other independent systems asynchronously react to and act upon that event in real time. So what that means is basically that the system is sending out a file. It doesn't really care if it arrives or where it arrives, and then other systems who can receive that file are reacting to it. That is quite simple, as I said, but we can also compare it to traditional integration. So traditional integration is synchronous. We have a request for data, and we have a response where the data is received. There's a tight coupling through that. So if one of the systems is not available, the whole integration will not work. I'm requesting data, I'm not receiving the data. The whole communication is not working here. There's a low scalability because it's a point-to-point communication. So each time you have a new consumer, you need to build a new interface between those two systems. You need to build up a new interface from scratch. And with a higher amount of connections, there's a higher complexity. Initially, the complexity is simpler in the traditional integration. You just need a one-to-one point connection. But the higher the amount of your connections is, the more receivers you have, the higher the complexity will get. On the other side, event-driven integration is asynchronous. So the producer system does not really care where the data goes. It creates the event with the data, it sends it out, and it doesn't really care where it goes or what is done with that data. It does not expect an instant reply. It's also push-based. So the data is being sent out. It's not requested from the receiver systems. The producer system produces the data and sends it out without actually receiving any requests. There's a loose coupling. As I said, components don't necessarily know about each other's existence. There might be a way that they're exchanging data, but all of that is going asynchronously. So data will be sent out without actually having to be requested first. Very often the producer system doesn't even know which receiver systems are actually getting the data. There's a high scalability through that. So as I mentioned, in the point-to-point connection, you will always have to build a new interface every time you're actually creating a new connection. In this case, the producer system does not have that effort. You only need to build one connection to one so-called broker, and then the broker will send the information out to all the receivers. So no point-to-point connection is needed, which, of course, initially it's a high complexity to set this up, but with each new system, the complexity falls because you don't have to rebuild your case again and again. Systems can just subscribe to the events that the producer is sending, and that makes the whole thing a lot more easy with a high number of connected systems. So the way this works is we have a producer, and this producer is sending events to an event broker. The event broker is usually containing topics. So all the events can be sent into specific topics. These topics, as the name say, they're basically just brackets collecting the data of a specific topic um, and then distributing those. In the next step, this event broker is then sending that information to different consumers. So not every consumer will get all the information that is within the event broker. The consumers can subscribe to specific topics that are relevant to them. So I can decide to just get sales order information, or I can just decide to get purchase order information, depending on what my system, the receiver system is. So the consumers in this case will be connected to the event broker and receive the information. And as you can see, the arrows are all going towards the right. So that means it's a push-based system. No consumer has to request anything. All the data is being sent out from the producer to the consumers. Now, where does ASAPIO come into all of this? To explain that is, I would have to start with notification events. So within the SAP world, events are still a relatively new topic. And what SAP has a lot are notification events. So a notification event is an event that contains only the information that something has happened. Imagine purchase order changed, ID 123. So we know that a purchase order has changed. We receive no other information with that event. So you receive a file that's just giving you that information, changed 123. So to actually get more data, the consumers have to query the source system for details. They will send a request and get the data. As you may know, or as you have seen in the traditional integration, we're losing the one of the main points of event-driven integration with that. If I have to send out an event, purchase order has changed, and then the receiver system has to ask, what is the data that has changed? We're losing the loose coupling. We have a one-to-one, point-to-point integration, and we have event-driven integration. We've combined them and kind of gotten the worst of both worlds in this case. And of course, that's only possible if the the producer system, sorry, has APIs necessary for requesting that data. Now, compared to to notification events, there's also data events. As you see, the callback has disappeared. So this means that the producer system, in this case, an SAP system, it creates an event that already contains all the necessary information about the change objects. So the event will not just say purchase order changed 123. It will contain the information purchase order 123 changed, vendor so and so, delivery date so and so items, and then it will name all the items. So depending on your payload, the event will already contain all the information that the consumers need. Of course, that means that there's a common data model between the producer and consumers. So that has to be set up. That also means that there's a higher resource consumption upfront, but overall it's faster because you're building that event, you're sending the event towards the event broker, and there's no further requests for the data. Typical use cases for this are if you need to trigger automatic data processing at the consumer. So you want to send something out and the consumer wants to instantly process the data that it received without having to have another request. Or for data analytics, you're sending out a lot of information towards a system that does all the analytics for you. And the more we can send in a short amount of time, the better this will work. So for a quick comparison, on the left, we have the notification event. As you can see, it only says order created, order ID 123. On the right, the data event has order ID 123, and then it has additional information, a user ID, the amount, and the items. So the data event is much bigger. It's a much bigger file, but it already contains way more information that doesn't have to be requested. I'm not saying that the notification event is bad or doesn't have to be used. There is purposes to this. It's of course faster if you don't have to receive any data. If the consumer doesn't need any data, but just the information that the order has been created, then that can be used too. You can trigger some workflows with this. You can um, just update the status with this. So that can be a lot faster. But in most cases, you will want to have the information. What has changed? What information do I need? And for that, you will need the data event. So as soon as you want to provide more details to another system, the data event is the one that I would go with. And yes, so the question is, how does ASAPIO come into play here? What do we do and how do we help with this? Well, what our integration add-on is basically an event listener. So as I mentioned before, SAP is very good with having notification events, but there's currently a lack of data events on on SAP systems. So what our add-on does is listen to those events that are triggered by SAP. So for example, a purchase order is changed, an event has been triggered, purchase order 1 to 3 is changed. So what we do here is we catch this event and we create a payload that can be pre-configured fill it with the data that you have defined and send out a data event. So we're catching a notification event, we're sending out a data event towards a multitude of event brokers that we can connect to, and then these can be distributed to all the consumers. To look into it a little further, we have a codeless payload definition. So that's something that's very important here. We can use CDS views, we can use table views, IDOCs, or our own payload designer, where you can define what data do you actually want to send to the consumers. As I've mentioned before, it's very important to have a common data concept between producer and consumer so that everyone knows which data is sent out, which data is received, so that everyone can work with that data. To do that, you can define your payloads, you can define which data you want to send out with each event, and you can also do that in multiple versions so that multiple consumers or multiple topics can have different data for the same event. We're reacting to all standard triggers, so we can react to SAP business object events, we can react to to RUP events, to business transaction events, to change documents, IDOCs. Basically, anything that triggers an event, we can react to it. And we're also able to use custom business object events or scheduled jobs so that might not be in real time, but it will still send out all the data events when the job is scheduled. In addition to that, we have some experience with data events. Not some, a lot. So over the years, we have defined some predefined content that's also delivered with the integration add-on. So we have predefined events that we think work for most of our customer bases. There might be a need to adapt those. So you can customize the standard predefined events that we're sending. You can create custom events with the payload designer. And you can also use standard events and enrich them if that is necessary. Um, so yes, basically, to jump back a couple of slides, this is what we are doing. So we're taking the notification, purchase order is changed. We're getting that information and sending it out to multiple consumers, which also means if there's an event broker in between, the scalability of this is just on a whole other level. You can connect as many consumers as necessary. With a common data model, you can scale it almost infinitely without actually affecting the producer system. So the producer system will send out the information and it will not have to send it. Let's assume that 50 consumers need this information. The producer can create that, it can send it out once, and the 50 consumers will receive it. So the strain on your SAP system in this case will be much, much smaller. Your integration will be much faster and work in real time, which is also the reason why I'm doing this today. It's basically a call to action. If you have not thought about your integration modernization yet, please feel free to contact us at any time so that we can see what your scenarios are and how we can help you with getting into a more modern integration architecture. Thank you. Are there any questions? Okay, if there is, thank you. And again, I will also share my email in the chat. So if you have any questions coming up in the future, or if you want to know more about event-driven integration or the add-on, please let us know. And yes, we can share the presentation, not a problem. We will forward it to you in shortly. Thank you. Goodbye.